Letters from a Living Dead Man by Elsa Barker. Read for you by BlueFriend in beautiful BC. Part 3. Letter 12. The Pattern World. There's something I want to qualify in what I said the other day, that there is nothing out here which has not existed on the earth. Since then, I have learned that that statement is not exactly true. There are strata here. This I have learned recently. I still believe that in the lowest stratum next the earth, all or nearly all that exists has existed on earth in dense matter. Go a little farther up, a little farther away, how far I cannot say by actual measurement, but the other night, in exploring, I got into the world of patterns, the paradigms, if that is the word, of things which are to be on earth. I saw forms of things which, so far as I know, have not existed on your planet. Inventions, for example. I saw wings that man could adjust to himself. I saw also new forms of flying machines. I saw model cities and towers with strange wing-like projections on them, of which I could not imagine the use. The progress of mechanical invention is evidently only begun. Another time I will go on farther up in that world of pattern forms and see if I can learn what lies beyond it. Bear this in mind. I merely tell you stories, as an earthly traveler would tell, of the things that I see. Sometimes my interpretation of them may be wrong. When I was in the place which we will call the pattern world, I saw almost nobody there, only an occasional lone voyager like myself. I naturally infer from this that but few of those who leave the earth go up there at all. I think, from what I have seen, and from conversations I've had with men and women's souls, that most of them do not get very far from the earth, even out here. It is strange, but many persons seem to be in the regular, orthodox heaven, singing in white robes with crowns on their heads and with harps in their hands. There's a region which outsiders call the heaven country. There is also, they tell me, a fiery hell with at least the smell of brimstone, but so far I have not been there. Some day, when I feel strong, I will look in, and if it is not too depressing, I will go farther, if they will let me. For the present, I am looking about here and there, and I have not studied carefully any place as yet. I took the boy, whose name, by the way, is Lionel, out with me yesterday. Perhaps we ought to say last night, for your day is our night when we are on your side of this great hollow sphere. You and the solid earth are in the center of our sphere. I took the boy out with me for what you would call a walk. First, we went to the old quarter of Paris where I used to live in a former life, but Lionel could not see anything, and when I pointed out certain buildings to him, he asked me quite sincerely if I were dreaming. I must have some faculty which is not generally developed among my fellow citizens in the astral country. So when the boy found that Paris was only a figment of my imagination, he used to live in Boston, I took him to see heaven, and he remarked, Why, this must be the place my grandmother used to tell me about, but where is God? That I could not tell him, but on looking again, we saw that nearly everybody was gazing in one direction. We also gazed with the others, and saw a great light like a sun, only it was softer and less dazzling than the material sun. That, I said to the boy, is what they see who see God. And now I have something strange to tell you, for as we gazed at that light, slowly there took form between us and it the figure which we are accustomed to see represented as that of Christ. He smiled at the people and stretched out his hands to them. Then the scene changed, and he had on his left arm a lamb, and then again he stood as if transfigured upon a mountain. Then he spoke and taught them. We could hear his voice, and then he vanished from our sight. Letter 13. Forms Real and Unreal. When I first came out here, I was so interested in what I saw that I did not question much as to the manner of the seeing. But lately, especially since writing the last letter or two, I have begun to notice a difference between objects that at a superficial glance seem to be of much the same substance. For example, I can sometimes see a difference between those things which have existed on earth unquestionably, such as the forms of men and women, and other things which, while visualized and seemingly palpable, may be, and probably are, but thought creations. This idea came to me while looking on at the dramas of the heaven country, and it was forced upon me with greater power while making other and recent explorations in that which I have called the pattern world. Later I may be able to distinguish at a glance between these two classes of seeming objects. For example, if I encounter here a being, or what seems a being, and if I'm told that it is some famous character in fiction, such as Jean Valjean in Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, I shall have reason to believe that I have seen a thought form of sufficient vitality to stand alone as a quasi-entity in this world of tenuous matter. So far I have not encountered any such characters. Of course, unless I were able to hold conversation with a being, a form, or saw others do so, I could not positively state that it had an essential existence. Hereafter I shall often put things to the test in this way. If I can talk to a seeming entity, and if it can answer me, I am justified in considering it as a reality. A character in fiction or any other mental creation, however vivid as a picture, would have no soul, no unit of force, no real self. Whatever comes to me merely as a picture, I shall try to submit to this test. If I see a peculiar form of tree or animal and can touch or feel it, for the senses here are quite as acute as those of earth, I know that it exists in the subtle matter of this plane. I believe that all the beings whom I have seen here are real, but if I can find one that is not, a being which I cannot feel when I touch it, and which cannot respond to my questions, I shall have a datum for my hypothesis that thought forms of beings, as well as things, may have sufficient cohesion to seem real. It is undoubtedly true that there is no spirit without substance, no substance without spirit, latent or expressed. But a painting of a man may seem, at a distance, to be a man. Can there exist deliberate thought creations here? Deliberate and purposive creations? I believe so. Such a thought form would probably have to be very intense in order to persist. It seems to me that I had better settle this question to my own satisfaction before talking any more about it. Letter 14. A folio of Paracelsus. The other day I asked my teacher to show me the archives in which those who had lived out here had recorded their observations, if such existed, and he said, "You were a great reader of books when you were on the earth. Come." We entered a vast building, like a library, and I caught my breath in wonder. It was not the architecture of the building which struck me, but the quantities of books and records. There must have been millions of them. I asked the teacher if all the books were here. He smiled and said, "Are there not enough? You can make your choice." I asked if the volumes were arranged by subjects. "There is an arrangement," he answered. "What do you want?" I said that I should like to see the books in which were written the accounts of explorations which other men had made in this, to me, still slightly known country. He smiled again and took from a shelf a thick volume. It was printed in large black type. "Who wrote this book?" I asked. "There is a signature," he replied. I looked at the end and saw the signature. It was that used by Paracelsus. "When did he write this?" "Soon after he came out. It was written between his Paracelsus life and his next one, on earth." The book which I had opened was a treatise on spirits, human, angelic, and elemental. It began with the definition of a human spirit as a spirit which had had the experience of life in human form, and it defined an elemental spirit as a spirit of more or less developed self-consciousness which had not yet had that human experience. Then the author defined an angel as a spirit of a high order which had not had, and probably would not have in the future, such experience in matter. He went on to state that angelic spirits were divided into two sharply defined groups, the celestial and the infernal, the former being those angels who worked towards harmony with the laws of God, and the latter being those angels who worked against that harmony. But he said that both these orders of angels were necessary, each to the other's existence, that if all were good, the universe would cease to be, that good itself would cease to be through the failure of its opposite, evil. He said that in the archives of the angelic regions there were cases on record where a good angel had become bad, or a bad angel had become good, but that such cases were of rare occurrence. He then went on to warn his fellow souls, who should be sojourning in that realm in which he then wrote, and in which I knew myself also to be, against holding communion with evil spirits. He declared that in the subtler forms of life there were more temptations than in the earth life, that he himself had often been assailed by malignant angels who had urged him to join forces with them, and that their arguments were sometimes extremely plausible. He said that while living on earth he had often had conversations with spirits both good and bad, but that while on earth he had never, so far as he knew, held converse with an angel of a malignant nature. He advised his readers that there was one way to determine whether a being of the subtler world was an angel, or merely a human or an elemental spirit, and that was by the greater brilliancy of the light which surrounded an angel. He said that both good and bad angels were extremely brilliant, but that there was a difference between them, perceptible at the first glance at their faces, that the eyes of the celestial angels were aflame with love and intellect, while the eyes of the infernal angels were very unpleasant to encounter. He said that it would be possible for an infernal angel to disguise himself to a mortal, so that he might be mistaken for an angel of light, but that it was practically impossible for an angel to disguise his real nature from those souls who were living in their subtle bodies. I will perhaps say more on this subject another night. I must rest now. Letter 15. A Roman Toga. One thing which makes this country so interesting to me is its lack of conventionality. No two persons are dressed in the same way, or no, I do not mean that exactly, but many are so eccentrically dressed that their appearance gives variety to the whole. My own clothes are, as a rule, similar to those I wore on earth, though I have, as an experiment, when dwelling in thought on one of my long past lives, put on the garments of the period. It is easy to get the clothes one wants here. I do not know how I became possessed of the garments which I wore on coming out, but when I began to take notice of such things, I found myself dressed about as usual. I'm not yet sure whether I brought my clothes with me. There are many people here in costumes of the ancient days. I do not infer from this fact that they've all been here for all those ages. I think they wear such clothes because they like them. As a rule, most persons stay near the place where they lived on earth, but I have been a wanderer from the first. I go rapidly from one country to another. One night, or day to you, I may take my rest in America. The next night I may rest in Paris. I have spent hours of repose on the divan in your sitting room, and you did not know that I was there. I doubt, though, if I could stay for hours in your house when I myself was awake without your sensing my presence. Do not think, however, from what I have just said, that it is necessary for me to rest on the solid matter of your world. Not at all. We can rest on the tenuous substance of our own world. One day, when I had been here only a short time, I saw a woman dressed in a Greek costume, and I asked her where she got her clothes. She replied that she'd made them. I asked her how, and she said, "Why, first I made a pattern in my mind, and then the thing became a garment." "Did you take every stitch?" "Well, not as I should have done on earth." I looked closer, and I saw that the whole garment seemed to be in one piece, and that it was caught on the shoulders by jeweled pins. I asked her where she got the jeweled pins, and she said that a friend had given them to her. Then I asked where the friend had got them. She told me that she did not know, but that she would ask him. Soon after that she left me, and I have not seen her since, so the question is still unanswered. I began to experiment to see if I also could make things. It was then that I conceived the idea of wearing a Roman toga, but for the life of me I could not remember what a Roman toga looked like. When next I met the teacher, I told him of my wish to wear a toga of my own making, and he carefully showed me how to create garments such as I desired, to fix the pattern and shape clearly in my mind, to visualize it, and then by power to desire, to draw the subtle matter of the thought world round the pattern, so as actually to form the garment. Then I said, "The matter of the thought world, as you call it, is not the same kind of matter as that of my body, for instance?" "In the last analysis," he answered, "there is only one kind of matter in both worlds, but there is a great difference in vibration and tenuity. Now the thought substance of which our garments are formed seems to be an extremely tenuous form of matter, while our bodies seem to be pretty solid. We do not feel at all like transparent angels sitting on damp clouds. Were it not for the quickness with which I get over space, I should think sometimes that my body was as solid as ever. I can often see you, and to me you seem tenuous. It is all, I suppose, the old question of adjusting to environment. At first I could not do it, and had some trouble in learning to adjust the amount of energy necessary for each particular action. So little energy is required here to move myself about that at first when I started to go a short distance, say a few yards, I'd find myself a mile away. But I'm now pretty well adjusted. I must be storing up energy here for a good hard life when I return to the earth again. The hardest work I do now is to come and write through your hand, but you offer less and less resistance as time goes by. In the beginning it took all my strength. Now it takes only a comparatively small effort. Yet I could not do it long at a time without using your own vitality, and that I will not do. You may have noticed that you're no longer fatigued after the writing, though you used to be at first. But I was speaking of the lack of conventionality out here. Souls hail each other when they want to, without much ceremony. I have seen a few old women who were afraid to talk to a stranger, but probably they had not been here long, and the earth habits still clung to them. Do not think, however, that society here is too free and easy. It is not that, But men and women do not seem to be so afraid of each other as they were on earth. Letter 16. A thing to be forgotten. I want to say a word to those who are about to die. I want to beg them to forget their bodies as soon as possible after the change which they call death. Oh, the terrible curiosity to go back and look upon the thing which we once believed to be ourselves. The thoughts come to us now and then so powerfully that it acts in a way against our will and draws us back to it. With some, it is a morbid obsession, and many cannot get free from it while there remains a shred of flesh on the bones which they once leaned upon. Tell them to forget it altogether, to force the thought away, to go out into the other life free. Looking back upon the past is sometimes good, but not upon this relic of the past. It is so easy to look into the coffin, because the body which we wear now is itself a light in a dark place, and it can penetrate grosser matter. I have been back myself a few times, but I am determined to go back no more. Yet some day the thought may come to me again with compelling insistence to see how it's getting on. I do not want to shock or pain you, only to warn you. It is sad to see the sight which inevitably meets one in the grave. That may be the reason why many souls who have not been here long are so melancholy. They return again and again to the place which they should not visit. You know that out here, if we think intently of a place, we are apt to find ourselves there. The body which we use is so light that it can follow thought almost without effort. Tell them not to do it. One day, while walking down an avenue of trees, for we have trees here, I met a tall woman in a long black garment. She was weeping, for we have tears here also. I asked her why she wept, and she turned to me eyes of unutterable sadness. "I have been back to it," she said. My heart ached for her because I knew how she felt. The shock of the first visit is repeated each time, as the thing one sees is less and less what we like to think of ourselves as being. Often I remember that tall woman in black, walking down the avenue of trees and weeping. It is partly curiosity that draws one back, partly magnetic attraction, but it can do no good. It is better to forget it. I have sometimes longed, from sheer scientific interest, to ask my boy Lionel if he had been back to his body, but I have not asked him for fear of putting the idea into his mind. He has such a restless curiosity. Perhaps those who go out as children have less of that morbid instinct than we have. If we could only remember in life that the form which we call ourselves is not our real immortal self at all, we would not give it such an exaggerated importance, though we would nevertheless take needful care of it. As a rule, those who say that they have been here long do not seem old. I asked the teacher why, and he said that after a time, An old person forgets that he is old, that the tendency is to grow young in thought, and therefore young in appearance, that the body tends to take the form which we hold of it in our minds, that the law of rhythm works here as elsewhere. Children grow up out here, and they may even go on to a sort of old age if that is the expectation of the mind. But the tendency is to keep the prime, to go forward or back towards the best period, and then to hold that until the irresistible attraction of the earth asserts itself again. Most of the men and women here do not know that they have lived many times in flesh. They remember their latest life more or less vividly, but all before that seems like a dream. One should always keep the memory of the past as clear as possible. It helps one to construct the future. Those people who think of their departed friends as being all wise, how disappointed they would be if they could know that this life on this side is only an extension of life on earth. If the thoughts and the desires there have only been for material pleasures, the thoughts and desires here are likely to be the same. I have met veritable saints since coming out, but they have been men and women who held in earth life the saintly ideal, and who now are free to live it. Life can be so free here. There is none of that machinery of living which makes people on earth such slaves. In our world, a man is held only by his thoughts. If they are free, he is free. Few, though, are of my philosophic spirit. There are more saints here than philosophers, as the highest ideal of most persons, when intensely active, has been towards the religious rather than the philosophic life. I think the happiest people I have met on this side have been the painters. Our world is so light and subtle and so easily handled that it falls readily into the forms of the imagination. There are beautiful pictures here. Some of our artists try to impress their pictures upon the mental eyes of the artists of earth, and they often succeed in doing so. There is joy in the heart of one of our real artists when a fellow craftsman on your side catches an idea from him and puts it into execution. He may not always be able to see clearly how well the second man works out the idea, for it requires a special gift or a special training to see from one form of matter into the other, but the inspiring spirit catches the thought in the inspired one's mind and knows that a conception of his own is being executed upon the earth. With poets, it's the same thing. There are lovely lyrics composed out here and impressed upon the receptive minds of earthly poets. A poet told me that it was easier to do that with a short lyric than with an epic or a drama where a long continued effort was necessary. It's much the same with musicians. Whenever you go to a concert where beautiful music is being played, there is probably all round you a crowd of music-loving spirits drinking in the harmonies. Music on earth is much enjoyed on this side. It can be heard, but no sensitive spirit likes to go near a place where bad strumming is going on. We prefer the music of stringed instruments. Of all earthly things, sound reaches most directly into this plane of life. Tell that to the musicians. If they could only hear our music. I did not understand music on earth, but now my ears are becoming adjusted. It seems sometimes as if you must hear our music over there as we hear yours. You may have wondered how I spend my time and where I go. There's a lovely spot in the country which I never tire of visiting. It is on the side of a mountain, not far from my own city. There's a little road winding round a hill, and just above the road is a hut, a roofed enclosure with the lower side open. Sometimes I stay there for hours and listen to the rippling of the brook which runs beside the road. The tall, slender trees have become like brothers to me. At first I cannot see the material trees very clearly, but I go into the little hut, which is made of fresh, clean boards, with a sweet smell, and I lie down on the shelf or bunk along the wall, and then I close my eyes, and by an effort, or no, it is not what I'd call an effort, but by a sort of drifting, I can see the beautiful place. But you must know that this is in the night time there, and I see it by the light of myself. That is why we travel in the dark part of the 24 hours, for in the bright sunlight we cannot see at all. Our light is put out by the cruder light of the sun. One night I took the boy Lionel there with me, leaving him in the hut while I went a little distance away. Looking back, I saw the whole hut illuminated by a lovely radiance, the radiance of Lionel himself. The little building, which has a peaked roof, looked like a pearl lighted from within. It was a beautiful experience. I then went to Lionel and I told him to go in his turn a little distance away, while I took his place in the hut. I was curious to know if he would see the same phenomena when I lay there, if I could shed a light through dense matter, the boards of the building. When I called him to me afterwards and asked him if he had seen anything strange, he said, "What a wonderful man you are, Father! How did you make that hut seem to be on fire?" And then I knew that he had seen the same thing I had seen. But I am tired now and can write no more. Good night, and may you have pleasant dreams. Letter 17. The second wife over there. I am often called upon here to decide matters for others. Many people call me simply the judge, but we bear, as a rule, the name that we last bore on earth. Men and women come to me to settle all sorts of questions for them, questions of ethics, questions of expediency, even quarrels. Did you suppose that no one quarreled here? Many do. There are even long-standing feuds among them. The holders of different opinions on religion are often hot in their arguments, coming here with the same beliefs they had on earth, and being able to visualize their ideals and actually to experience the things they are expecting. Two men who hold opposite creeds forcibly are each more intolerant than ever before. Each is certain that he is right and the other is wrong. This stubbornness of belief is strongest with those who have been here only a short time. After a while, they fall into a larger tolerance, living their own lives more and more and enjoying the world of proofs and realizations which each soul builds for itself. But I want to give you an illustration of some of the questions on which I am asked to pass judgment. There are two women here who, in life, were both married to one man, though not at the same time. The first woman died. Then the man married again, and soon, not more than a year or two after, the man and his second wife both came out. The first wife considered herself the man's only wife, and she follows him about everywhere. She says that he promised to meet her in heaven. He is more inclined to the second wife, though he still feels affection for wife number one. He's rather impatient at what he calls her unreasonableness. He told me one day that he would gladly give them both up if he could be left in peace to carry out certain studies in which he is interested. These were among the people I met soon after I began to be strong myself here. It was not so very long ago, and the man has sought my society so much that the women, in order to be near him, have come along too. One day they all three came to me and propounded their question, or rather wife number one propounded it. She said, "This man is my husband. Should not therefore this other woman go far away and leave him altogether to me?" I asked wife number two what she had to say. Her answer was that she would be all alone here but for her husband, and that, as she had him last, he now belonged more to her than to the other. In a flash, the memory came to me of those Sadducees who propounded a similar question to Christ, and I quoted his answer as nearly as I could remember it, that when they shall rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels which are in heaven. My answer was as much a staggerer for them as their question had been for me, and they went away to think about it. When they were gone, I began myself to ponder the question. I had already observed that whether or not all here are as the angels in heaven, there does seem to be a good deal of mating and rejoining of former mates. The sex distinction is as real here as on earth, though, of course, its expression is not exactly the same. I asked myself a good many questions which perhaps would never have occurred to me but for the troubles of this interesting triad, and I thought of the man I had somewhere read about who said that he never knew his own opinion of anything until he tried to express it to somebody. After a while the three came to me again and said that they had been talking things over, perhaps after the manner of angels in heaven, for wife number one told me that she had decided to let her husband spend a part of his time with the other woman if he wanted to. Now, the man had a sweetheart, a girl sweetheart, before he had had either of his wives. The girl is out here somewhere, and the man often has a strong desire to try and find her. What opportunity he will now have to do so, I cannot say. The situation is rather depressing for the poor fellow. It is bad enough to have one person who insists on every minute of your society without having two. And I think his case is not unusual. Perhaps the only way in which he can get free from his two insistent companions is by going back to the earth. There is a way, however, by which he could secure solitude, but he does not know of it. A man who knows how can isolate himself here as well as he could on earth. He can build round himself a wall which only the eyes of a great initiate can pierce. I have not told this secret to my friend, but perhaps I shall some day, if it seems necessary for his development that he have a little solitude. At present, it seems to me that he will learn more from adjusting to this double claim and trying to find the truth that lies in it. Perhaps he may learn that really, essentially, fundamentally, he does not belong to either of these women. The souls out here seem to belong to themselves, and after the first few years they get to love liberty so much that they are ready to yield a little of their claim upon others. This is a great place in which to grow if one really wants to grow, though few persons take advantage of its possibilities. Most are content to assimilate the experiences they had on earth. It would be depressing to one who did not realize that will is free to see how souls let slip their opportunities here, even as they did on the moon-guarded planet. There are teachers here who stand ready to help anyone who wishes their help in making real and deep studies in the mysteries of life, the life here, the life there, and in the remote past. If a man understands that his recent sojourn on earth was merely the latest of a long series of lives, and if he concentrates his mind towards recovering the memories of the distant past, he can recover them. Some persons may think that the mere dropping of the veil of matter should free the soul from all obscuration, but as on earth, so out here, things are not thus and so because they ought to be, but because they are. We draw to ourselves the experiences which we are ready for and which we demand, and most souls do not demand enough here, any more than they did in life. Tell them to demand more, and the demand will be answered. Letter 18. Individual Hells. Some time ago I told you of my intention to visit hell, but when I began investigation on that line, there proved to be many hells. Each man who is not content with the orthodox hell of fire and brimstone builds one out of mind stuff, suited to his imaginative need. I believe that men place themselves in hell, that no God puts them there. I began looking for a hell of fire and brimstone, and I found it. Dante must have seen the same thing I saw. But there are other and individual hells. Editor's note: the writing suddenly stopped for no apparent reason, and it was not continued that night. End of part 3.